really has been my profound honor to serve as chair this past year. It's also been a privilege to work with each of the governors and so many of your both staff, workforce agencies, and others, and concentrate on really the critical, our efforts on critical issues facing our nation. And we'll have time to feat the good Governor Hogan later on as he takes over the gavel, but really appreciate your partnership through every step of this as well, Governor Hogan. I'm excited to get to kick off our summer meeting with a session dedicated to the theme of what my chair's initiative was, and that's good jobs for all Americans. Over the past year, I've engaged many of you, both those at this table and those in the audience, and staff, in a discussion of how we as governors can prepare our workforce and businesses for the changing world of work and support the promise of a vibrant economy and future opportunity. We all know that we face a profound economic and a social transformation catalyzed by technological disruption and a changing world. We know that how we work and what we do at work will continue to evolve as it has in the years past. In our conversations with states, we've heard loud and clear that a challenge facing our economy isn't a lack of jobs, but a lack of good jobs that can grow and sustain the middle class. Many of the fastest growing sectors in our economy, they're often low wage with limited pathways for growth. Today that we see that recent college graduates have barely seen their hourly earnings budge since 2000. We can't grow the middle class when wages as a share of GDP have fallen 8% since 1970. And when 60% of Americans effectively haven't seen a pay increase in 40 years when adjusted for today's terms. We know that the economy, it's not working for everyone. Certainly the causes of this reality are complex. So through this initiative, we've consulted the research. We've spoken with experts, CEOs, and practitioners from many walks of life. We held 3 regional workshops across the country to help identify solutions in Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, and Des Moines. Thank you, Governor Reynolds and Governor Wolf, for certainly being gracious hosts and participants. Through this exercise, we've heard from more than 200 experts and representatives from nearly 40 states during these series of workshops. In Whitefish, Montana this past May, I hosted a solution summit where we brought policy leaders from 32 of our states together to continue this conversation and contribute to the governor's guide that we'll be releasing today. I'd like to show you a brief video now that will take you through some of the results of the initiative in these meetings with governors, state officials, CEOs, and other subject matter experts.
I chose the Good Jobs for All Americans initiative, both for what we as governors see, what we hear from employers, as well as what we hear from our constituents. Every single governor around the country is trying to make sure that the folks in their state are prepared not only for the jobs of today, but also opportunities and jobs of tomorrow. During this initiative, we've had over 200 experts. We've had over 42 states and territories involved, coming to the table to say, not just what are we doing today, but what can we be doing in the future? Due to changes, either automation or globalization, when the sands are kind of shifting underneath their feet, that we have to recognize what those changes are and equip people with new skills and new opportunities so that they can stay in their communities.
One of the things that I think is really cool is that we've been able to place what we call a work-based learning navigator within the Nevada system of higher education. And they really help to work with the different community colleges as well as the higher education institutes to create these work-based learning experiences across whether it's internship, job shadowing, apprenticeship, whatever that looks like.
And now we really are at a time of lifetime learning. saying wherever people are, we've got to be able to give them the skills and the opportunities. So I think it takes you looking differently on what your education systems are, where you can come back to the two-year colleges at any point.
Well, one of the things that I'm here to really try to get a handle on and learn about to bring back to the state of Maryland is this idea of helping those in mid-career job changes, folks who are either looking for career changes or looking to adapt to the new technologies out there, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of policies out there. So what Governor Bullock has done is really put that focus on that issue, and I'm looking forward to learning those things.
So nobody should have to leave their home or their church or their community just to make a decent living.
What I've liked about the Good Jobs for All Americans is their focus on rural initiatives and also on second act adults. Because in Iowa, we need to get more of our adults who are in low-skilled jobs into middle-skilled or high-skilled jobs. What's been really valuable to me at these meetings is the talk and discussion around what other states who have large rural areas are doing as an attempt to incentivize individuals to come to or stay in rural areas because of all the great opportunities that are available for both life and work.
It's been exciting because ultimately the answers that we need, they're right there in front of us. You have good people all across this country doing good work. And how we want to tie this initiative all together is bring that good work together for a guide for every single governor in our country so that they can make sure that every single individual in their state and communities have even a better shot at that American dream.
Now to join our conversation today and to provide a private sector perspective, please join me in welcoming Malcolm Frank. He's the president of Cognizant Digital Business. Malcolm joined us in Whitefish for that Solutions Summit, and he gave a keynote presentation that really did capture the essence of the challenges that we face in preparing the current and future workforce with the skills that they're going to need with technological change. Certainly pleased that he's joining us today. In his role as president of Cognizant Digital Business, he oversees Cognizant's broad digital services portfolio. That includes digital strategy, artificial intelligence and analytics, interactive, digital engineering, digital content platform, and Cognizant's Accelerator program, which incubates new industry-specific digital ventures. Prior to this role, Malcolm was Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Marketing Officer. His influence is wide-ranging and evident across media. He's co-authored 2 best-selling books, What to Do When Machines Do Everything and Code Halos, both of which received multiple international book awards. He's also authored numerous white papers focusing on the future of work and created the SMAC stack, now an industry standard. Highly sought after speaker, so I look forward to all we'll learn from him today. Thanks so much for being here, Malcolm.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, Governor Bullock. And thank you for having me. 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about 2 topics. The first is AI and jobs, and then the second is your state and how do you become a magnet for the digital jobs of the future. So we got a lot to cover. And let's go back 200 years, 200 plus years. The Luddites were actually right. They should have smashed those machines because a loom could do the work of 40 Luddites. But they weren't very good economists. Because what did the loom do? It became the platform for the first industrial revolution, and the societies and the communities that embraced that new machine saw skyrocketing GDPs, saw incredible public wealth creation, and also they created their jobs of the future at the time. It happened a second time with the steam engine that was the machine for the second industrial revolution. About 100 years ago, with the assembly line, drove the third industrial revolution. And we believe strongly that digital platforms, artificial intelligence platforms, are now the new machine driving the fourth industrial revolution. This was debatable a few years ago. I don't think it is any longer. You look at the value creation 8 of the top 10 companies, most valuable companies on earth, are based on these platforms. 2 have become trillion-dollar firms, like Amazon and Microsoft. We see this with the FANG vendors. This is a special time, and it's only just beginning. So artificial intelligence is the great story of our time. But it's a story that generates lots of mixed emotions, great ambivalence. On one hand, lots of excitement, the art of the possible. We see this technical wonder. All of us spend way too much time on our smartphones working on these platforms. And yet there's this deep concern, this fear about jobs. If software is eating the world, is software going to eat middle-class jobs? The foundation of a good society? And are we going to be left in several years with some Elysium-class barbell society of the hyper-rich and then the poor who are living off a universal basic income? And this is a real concern that a lot of folks have. So we've done a lot of research on this at Cognizant Center for the Future of Work. Our latest book was about this. And we actually think there's a song of hope here. If you're proactive, if you take the right steps. Because when it comes to software and jobs or artificial intelligence and jobs, only one of 3 things will happen. A job can be eliminated. A job can actually be enhanced. And think of using Waze when you drive around town. You as a driver are actually being enhanced by a machine. And we're going to see this come to medicine, we're going to see it come to teaching, we're going to see it come to police work, or there will be jobs of the future that we don't know now, but of course, try to explain a web designer to somebody in 1978. So these are the 3 things that are going to occur. And 90% of the conversation is here today, that we're eliminating jobs and we're all going to be working for our robot overlords. Where actually about 90% of the activity is going to be about job enhancement or creating the jobs of the future. And in fact, in our estimation, about 12% of jobs will be lost over the next decade. This is quite significant. These are millions of jobs that could go away due to the bot. And if you do nothing, there's going to be a gravity. You will be victimized by this. I grew up in the Cleveland area, so to be in Cleveland in the 70s and 80s, WMMS, awesome. To be in Cleveland during the 70s and 80s, it was rough to watch all of those jobs go away. It was really brutal to observe. But we're quite optimistic that if you're proactive, you can create these jobs of the future and protect great jobs going forward. So how do you do that? And I want to spend time on your state. How do you become a jobs magnet? And I'll open our playbook. We're one of the largest tech employers in the US. At Cognizant, we've got about 280,000 employees, and we also work very closely with leading platforms like Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle, SAP, so forth and so on. So I'm going to give you a playbook, candidly, how we view you. When we decide where to invest, we've got a $100 million foundation around tech jobs of the future. We're investing in local communities. How do we invest that money? Because with economic shifts, it will create winners and losers, and this is not for just a bunch of bearded hipsters in San Francisco or New York. This is available to everybody. It's about brain power and not natural resources. So what do? Here are the 5 elements. We could spend an hour on each of these. I'm going to spend just 1 minute introducing them. The first is finance. We take a look at what is the role of government with the private sector. Now, this is a famous case. This one worked fabulously well. You could argue the morality of it, but boy, economically did that work. But today, we look at the role of state government with Fortune 500s. Are they investing in your state or are they pulling back? We look at private equity, venture capital, incubators for new job creation, new company formation. And interestingly, the one that's a canary in the coal mine, it's the smallest group, but often the highest indicator, are angel investors. These are people that got really wealthy in your state. They grew up in your state. They love it. Are they staying and reinvesting, or are they leaving? And that is really something that we look very closely at, of the attractiveness of these communities and if they're investing in your state. The second is interesting, bricks and clicks. What do we mean by this? Bricks are buildings, old buildings, built out of bricks. And clicks are new digital workers that are clicking away on their computers inside. This is a hot trend. Revitalizing urban areas. This is happening in lots of places. The leather district in Boston, the meatpacking district in New York. It's happening across Europe. In fact, this is King's Cross in London. I was there a couple of weeks ago at our office. That's what it looked like 25 years ago. In one generation, the regentrification of this neighborhood as the digital hub is simply remarkable. In fact, that's what it looks like today. That was a photograph from a few weeks ago of these tech workers that are working in this community. Amazing public-private partnership to revitalize the space. Our office is just off to the left. In fact, the new Googleplex is being built just behind where this photograph was taken. And so with this, you see HEB is creating a new headquarters for digital workers. Kroger is doing the same to attract digital workers. Walmart is now building a 300-acre campus specifically to attract digital workers of the future. And if you look, for example, in Pittsburgh, Bakery Square, they're doing the same. And so what are the common elements here? These workers do not want to work in some soul-destroying office park in Cube Land off of a, cloverleaf intersection in an interstate highway. They want to be in these urban areas, in revitalized down. You can kill two birds with one stone of urban regentrification and rebuilding, as well as attracting these workers and these companies. They want a vibrant, diverse community, a social scene. Of course, it has to be safe. But then also there's a weird correlation here. We're seeing where MLS teams are popular, it attracts these workers. Who knows cause and effect? But there certainly is a pretty big correlation. So bricks and clicks matter. The third that we look at, it's pretty simple. You can go straight to a spreadsheet. Is your educational system producing enough digital workers? I think there's been a huge mismatch between the academy and the private sector. It used to be incredibly strong. Look at the miracle of the California university system in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and somehow that's become disconnected. But we take a strong look. You see this sticking with Pittsburgh. Pitt, Carnegie Mellon, Duquesne, these schools are producing lots of computer scientists, data scientists, designers, electrical engineers, and so this attracts business and attracts the whole ecosystem. There's no, if you look at the magic of Silicon Valley, it all started with the educational ecosystem out there as well. So there's an incredibly important role for state government to play in driving this connection of the curriculum of producing these workers of the future. A fourth one is lose the tie. Jamie and I are bad at this. Governor Bullock got the memo. But what we mean by this is the culture of this community. Take a company we all know, Goldman Sachs. In your mind's eye, think of a typical Goldman employee. You probably think that. Master of the universe, investment banker out of central casting. Or does it look more like this? Because what's interesting is Goldman now, this is an old article saying a quarter of their workforce writes code. It's actually more than 30% now write code. They're computer geeks. So is it an investment bank or is it a software company? It's really now both. And their new CEO, David Solomon, you can see him in the photo here. So he's wearing a tie at a conference. But this is how he moonlights. He's actually a DJ. So he really has that sensibility that's needed for this digital workforce. And a final point, make it open to everybody. Diversity. My industry has a problem. Tech is not diverse enough. It's a bro culture. It's overrepresented by men. And on top of that, now we love to say, oh, well, we're open to minorities. There's lots of minority representation. Yes, but. I mean, there's lots of Asians, mostly men again, a lot of Chinese, a lot of Indians, which is fantastic. But it's greatly underrepresented by the African American community, by the Latino community, and this needs to change. I now live in New York City. Earlier this year, we had the issue with Amazon headquarters 2, and when that blew up. And a lot of folks assigned blame. They said, one of my friends said this was New York's Brexit. I think that's a little over the top. But others were saying, well, this is socialist math. These are the socialists. So here's how they operate. You can give them 30 and ask for 3 back, or give them 0 and ask for 0 back, and they'd prefer the latter. Maybe. Another is people were quick to blame Amazon. They were ham-handed. They were clumsy in their efforts. Or they would blame the New York government. Governmental leaders didn't sell this enough. But I actually think the underlying problem was diversity. There was a sense that this was about the rich getting richer and not making it available to all. And so I think that this is really core to everything that has to occur. And I think people around this table can really lead the charge with that. So those are the 5. That's the formula. the business friendliness, revitalizing these areas that tech workers want to be in, creating enough workers of the future through the educational system, having a culture that supports these workers, and then finally making it open to everybody in the community. So to finish up, fear not the bot. Don't be a neo-Luddite. Embrace the new machine, because prosperity really does favor the proactive. So to quote Robert Plant, and not to stick this song in your head the rest of the morning, but this is a song of hope. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Malcolm. Also joining me up here is Jamie Marasotis, who's president and CEO of the Lumina Foundation. Jamie's going to share with us his perspective on Good Jobs for All Americans initiative and what more we all can be doing. He's a globally recognized leader in philanthropy, education, and public policy. Since 2008, he served as president and CEO of the Lumina Foundation, which is an independent private foundation that's committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available to all. Previously, he had served as co-founder and president of the nonpartisan DC-based Institute for Higher Education Policy, and as executive director of a bipartisan National Commission on College Affordability appointed by the US President and congressional leaders. He's the author of the widely acclaimed book, America Needs Talent, which was named a top 10 business book of 2016 by Booklist. His work also includes extensive global experience as an advisor and consultant in Southern Africa, the former Soviet Union, Europe, and other parts of the world. Respected analyst and innovator, Jamie's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. Jamie, thanks for being here.
Thanks very much, Governor Bullock. Appreciate it. Well, let me begin first by congratulating you on your initiative. Good Jobs for All Americans, I think, is a smart agenda. It's an actionable agenda, and you're to be commended for the important work that I think states can now implement as a result of the important work that's been done here. And I think Malcolm's presentation really sort of underscores the importance of why that work matters. I took three big things out of what Malcolm had to say in his excellent remarks. Probably the biggest headline for me, Malcolm, is work is changing in profound ways, and we absolutely need to be prepared to understand how we actually develop and deploy the talent that we need as a country to address that rapidly changing nature of work. There is a rising demand for talent, but there's a huge mismatch between what we produce and how we actually deploy that talent going forward. One expression of that is that the vast majority of the jobs today, more than 2/3, require some form of post-high school education credential, a degree, a certificate, or other credential. Today, only 48% of Americans have a post-secondary credential. So we must understand that work is changing in profound ways. And if you want a further piece of evidence of what Malcolm was talking about in terms of the changing nature of jobs, I would spend no time on trying to predict which jobs are going to be lost and which jobs are going to be created. MIT did a study last year of all of the studies that had been done, did a one-pager, and they found absolutely no correlation among all of them, from Oxford to McKinsey to OECD. It didn't make any sense. So don't spend any time on that. Think more about the tasks associated with the work and how, as governors, your states need to actually prepare people for those tasks, because they're going to be constantly changing. Several of you have developed initiatives there. Second big headline for me, Malcolm, is I think who we need to serve as a result of the changing nature of work is very important. Here, I think we need to come to grips with the fact that lots of Americans haven't had the opportunities to actually participate in this economy and actually get the good jobs because they aren't prepared to do them. We have many challenges in our country related to income, race, and other factors. We need to address these equity challenges if we're actually going to meet the rising demand for talent in the United States and actually develop and deploy the talent that we need. Lumina Foundation, we're the largest private foundation in the country focused on post-high school learning. We've invested in many initiatives across the country, including some important ones in states that are actually trying to reduce the equity gaps in their states and actually hold themselves accountable to those public commitments. I want to congratulate Governor Lee from Tennessee, Governor Northam from Virginia, Governor Brown from Oregon, for the important work that those states are doing in those efforts. And we have 7 states, and I probably won't remember them all, so I'm not going to list them off, that have planning grants from Lumina Foundation because they're trying to prepare to actually do similar work. So it's important to think about who we're going to serve in this system going forward. The third thing, and I think this is the sort of exclamation point on what Malcolm talked about when he talked about the educational ecosystem, is that it really is an ecosystem. It's not just colleges and universities. It's workforce-based training. It's direct-to-consumer mediated learning. It's all the stuff that's happening in communities, in workplaces, et cetera. All of that is enormously important, and we need to be thinking about that ecosystem of post-secondary learning and the credentials that people get to show that they are actually qualified to do that work of the future. That's going to be extraordinarily important. You know, going forward, a college degree may or may not have the value that it does today. But I'll tell you, employers are going to continue to want to know that you know and can do something in order to be able to do the work that's needed. Here, I think we need radical change in the educational ecosystem. Tinkering on the margins isn't enough. It's great for states to first set goals for what they want to try to accomplish in post-secondary education. 42 states have done that. It's an important first step in the process, but actually finding the ways to tip the, to create a tipping point for your state and change dramatically the educational attainment that you have at the post-high school level to power your economy, to strengthen the democracies that exist in your states, that's going to be very important.
Thank you both, Malcolm and Jamie. And we'll start out a couple questions, then I'll open it up to governors. One of the things that we heard time and time again through these workshops is really the importance of government, private sector, philanthropy, all working together to address the challenges that we face. How do each of you think about partnering with states to better prepare for the future work?
Well, here in our case at Lumina, because we've been an investor, we actually have a mechanism that I would encourage you to take advantage of as governors called Strategy Labs. We actually bring together policy leaders to actually try to solve problems together across states. So it's a platform for policy leaders to talk about the issues and actually create solutions and to share information across them. Strategy Labs is a mechanism that every state can take advantage of in order to learn from what we've learned in the work that we've done with states. So that's one important element of that work. I think more broadly, every state needs to see its state agencies now as talent agencies. I think historically we've seen agencies as having a transactional role, which of course they do. You need a Department of Transportation, you need Commerce, you need whatever the agency may be. But all of them are essentially talent agencies. All of them are actually transformational talent agencies because they are doing work to improve and increase the talent in your states, again, to sort of power your economy and strengthen the success of the residents of your state. This is happening in lots of interesting areas. In corrections, for example, we've seen a growing number of states investing in their corrections departments to actually educate prisoners so that they can actually have a second chance when they get out. This is not the core function of a Department of Corrections, but it's an important part of what they do. And several states, Governor Reynolds from Iowa, there's a new Higher Ed for Prisoners initiative in Iowa, for example, that is a really good example, and many of you have done similar things. The third thing that I think is going to be important for governors to think about in this space is to actually see how you can better consolidate and get efficiency from the efforts that you already have underway in your states. One of the problems, you all know this as both new and longstanding governors, is that these entities sort of exist in stovepipes and they don't actually collaborate. So creating structures where they can collaborate across agencies is really important. In my book from a couple years ago, I talked about this idea of creating departments of talent, not a new state agency, but actually a consolidation of efforts where you'd bring your higher ed and your workforce development and your talent recruitment functions together into an agency so that you can actually attract, educate, and deploy the talent that you need to make your state successful. These are the kinds of the things that I think need to be done in order to make your states more successful when it comes to educational attainment.
Yeah, and it's we got to close the skills gap, and you have to help us in very pragmatic ways. So the work you've done in Missoula with us, we're absolutely thrilled. We're over the moon about the talent that's in Missoula and how that team is really starting to build.
You might tell them what that is.
Yeah, so it's a firm, ATG, but it's with you, we've invested there, we've started to build that out, and it really, in the Missoula community, it's just like dropping a pebble in the water and you can see the concentric circles start to build. So as opposed to going in at 30,000 feet at levels of abstraction, be very practical and get things started, and that's really worked incredibly well. Because if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they're saying in a few years' time, we're going to have 1.5 million jobs short, a gap in the US around these digital jobs. So these are great jobs, very well paying, they're green, it's a growing field, but we have this incredible gap. So we've worked in partnership, for example, in New York, in the South Bronx with Per Scholas around programs to help people in that community enter this economy. We've done it actually with the state of North Carolina with Goodwill Industries, actually, where Goodwill has programs where we can work with folks to get them on this ladder and start to climb this ladder in the digital economy. So we think that those very practical initiatives that can get jobs started and change the trajectory of individuals and families is incredibly important.
Yeah, and the program that we're talking about was a very short-term, 6 weeks,
That's right.
8-week program where they're taking folks in, giving them some skills, and it's then getting them all jobs, which has been great. You know, one of the things, when you were talking, Malcolm, you kind of talked about what you look for in when you're going to cite Cognizant. Now I have to go find a Major League Soccer team to move to Montana. But in addition to that, like what would your advice be if you woke up one day and you're governor? What's the most impactful strategy a governor can pursue as we look to prepare that workforce of the future?
Yeah, I think it's a few things, but it's the 1-2 punch is the educational system that's not going to produce results overnight, but that is an incredibly clear signal to the business community. And that's really what all these firms are looking for. It's you don't want to show up and just have a fly-by-night relationship. This is multi-decade that we're looking for in terms of partnership. And so is the educational system going to be there? And then places for folks to work. This is why Missoula has been just fantastic. People love working there. And so similarly, if we can find that urban revitalization, I think those are the two that really are the pillars that start to drive this.
And Jamie, Lumina and you have been doing just incredible work to increase post-secondary attainment, certainly throughout the foundation's history. How do we make sure that that attainment then can translate into the jobs of the future that we're hearing about that we may not even know what those jobs are?
Yeah, by the way, I just returned from living in London for 6 months. I'm a big fan of the soccer idea. I think you should take that up.
I'm working on it. I've got a lot on my plate, and now I'm getting a soccer team to Montana.
So I run this national foundation, and part of my job is to stay sort of a step ahead of the work and what's going on. So I'm working on a new book. I'm preparing people for the future of human work, the work that only humans can do. And one of the things that I found in my research for the new book is this interesting fact about how much human knowledge has changed in the course of history. So between the earliest part of recorded history in 1900, human knowledge doubled every 100 years. By 1950, it was doubling every 25 years. By 2000, it was doubling every year. Today, there's evidence that human knowledge is doubling every day. So how we stay ahead of that is incredibly important, and the post-secondary learning ecosystem has got to be critical to that. We actually have to understand how human knowledge is changing and how we apply it to work, how we apply it to the way people learn. And here I think this goes back to your initiative, Governor, this idea of this virtuous cycle of learning and working is very important. You know, we've all grown up with this system, with this model. We have this sort of mental frame. First you learn, then you work, right? Those are the phases of life. But the reality is today, you have to actually ratchet your way through that process of learning and working all the way through if you're going to be successful in work, if you're going to be an effective participant in your communities, if life is going to actually bring you the rewards that you deserve. So we've got to be thinking about building these post-secondary learning ecosystems within the context of the lives of people who are working. Today's college student, the learner of today, is not your typical 18-year-old graduating from high school and going and living in a dorm on a residential campus. That represents less than 1 out of 5 of all the learners in colleges and universities today. Today, these students are adults. They're working. Almost half of college students today work at least 20 hours a week, and a significant number of them work full-time. 1 out of every 4 college students today is actually a parent. So they are actually dealing with those things. So we've got to be thinking about building a post-secondary attainment model, building a post-secondary learning ecosystem that meets the learners today where they are and actually gives them those opportunities through their work and through the existing educational ecosystem that Malcolm talked about to help them be successful. A key to this, and I just want to underscore this point, is something I said earlier, which is the credentials are really going to matter. The credentials really are that currency in the labor market for the worker. And so employers want to know what you know and what you can do. A big problem with the current credential ecosystem is that there is no translation tool among all of the different credentials that are out there. So you get a license or a certification or a certificate or a degree or anything else, and those systems don't talk to each other. We've got to find ways to recognize that all learning counts and then actually develop a system so that these credentials can talk to each other. We've invested in something that is basically an infrastructure, a platform called Credential Engine. It's basically the DNA that you're going to need for these credential systems to talk to each other. It's actually a web-based protocol. This protocol, which is now being pilot tested by employers, by colleges and universities, by workforce agencies, is actually something that I hope states can invest in to actually publish the data that they have about their credentials using this protocol so that we can actually better understand what employers expect from the workers that they're trying to hire and what the skills are of the people who are being hired. In order to do that, we need to have these translation mechanisms across those credentials. If we can do that, we will have the DNA, the raw material, for a very different credential ecosystem going forward. And this is something I hope we at Lumina Foundation can work with you as states.
Thanks, Jamie and Malcolm. And now I'd like to invite other governors to join in the discussion, share your comments or questions with Malcolm, Jamie, and me. Governor Hogan, I'll turn to you first. And also thanks for joining us for the workshop in Iowa. Would you mind sharing your insights, takeaways from those discussions? Anything else?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the panelists for joining us. It's a fascinating discussion, and I really want to give my thanks and appreciation to Governor Bullock for his leadership of the NGA over the past year, and also for his initiative here on good jobs for all Americans. And it's been a pleasure working alongside him. I think this has been a great year-long campaign focused on good jobs and on growing our economy. I had the pleasure of joining Governor Bullock and Governor Reynolds in Iowa for a regional workshop where we were able to share some good ideas and best practices, and then some of my team was able to join on a couple of the other. My Commerce Secretary and Lieutenant Governor participated in a couple of other events along with some of my senior staff, and I think it was really helpful, and we got leaders from across the country that Governor Bullock pulled together. Great discussions about workforce, and particularly some interesting discussions about rural workforce and about the jobs of the future. I really think it's been a terrific initiative, and I want to thank you for your leadership. I think it was a valuable opportunity to get thought leaders together from the private sector, from many different perspectives, together with the governors and some of our staffs, and to discuss some of the challenges that we face in our various states. And I just want to thank Governor Reynolds. Thank you for hosting us out in Iowa, and thank Governor Bullock for his leadership on this initiative, and thank our panelists for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Governor. And Governor Reynolds, it was great to host us in Des Moines, and really also what we learned from you, particularly as it relates to rural areas. Would you share some of your insights, takeaways?
Yeah, I want to reiterate other comments. Thank you so much for your initiative on Good Jobs for All Americans. There's not a governor across the state that's not dealing with workforce as we see the economy growing. We have jobs looking for people. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to host you in Iowa. We welcomed you with this nice spring day. I think it was a high of 0 on that day. But it was actually
That's
colder
right.
where you left home, if I remember
warmer in
right.
Montana.
I think all governors, especially that has been a priority of mine, is workforce and opportunities for all Iowans. So what we highlighted while you were in Iowa was a couple initiatives that we're working on. Our Future Ready Iowa initiative, which passed our legislature unanimously. And then we put the funding into it this year, again passed unanimously, where our goal is to have 70% of Iowans in the workforce have education or training beyond high school by the year 2025 through apprenticeship programs, last dollar scholars for a 2-year associates. Maybe an individual like myself completed a couple years of college and then had to put our daughters through school but wanted to go back and get my degree, and so there's some funding for that. And then an employer innovation fund where employers can come up with work-based learning programs, and there's a match from the state perspective. We're doing computer science as elementary for underserved and underrepresented schools across the state, really infusing computer science into all disciplines starting in elementary. And then one of the initiatives that we talked about that I'm really proud of, and I think it has a lot of opportunity to scale, is our registered apprenticeship programs in high school working with the Department of Labor. And this is a blueprint that's applicable to any industry. We started with welding, and a student can sign up with a company as a freshman. It's incorporated into the curriculum. They can work at the company their junior year. They work their entire summer between junior and senior year, and then go into the company when they graduate. And what I love about it is the students can make between $40,000 and $50,000 the last 2 years of high school, go right into a job, have absolutely no debt, and what we're seeing is the employers are giving them the opportunity, if they choose, to continue to advance in their career. So this is a game changer, and that happens in rural Iowa and in the cities. It can be with nursing, it can be with construction, it can be with computer science, you name the industry, the blueprint is there. And it's so encouraging to see the students engage in this and be so proud of what they're doing. And Charles is one of the individuals that went through the first welding apprenticeship program. He bought a new F-150 black truck, and all the other kids in school want the opportunity to buy that F-150 black truck as well. So, a lot of opportunities. I'll mention one other thing that we're doing, and we want to make sure that no matter where you live in the state, you have opportunities for work-based learning. It's a game changer. It allows kids to test run careers and find out where they have a passion. And we just launched in July a work-based learning clearinghouse where we have over 107 employers that have put work-based learning opportunities on the website. So teachers throughout the state, if they don't have an opportunity in their community, can go online and work with Cognizant and have an opportunity to participate in a work-based learning opportunity. So again, I want to say thank you. We focused on rural Iowa, but the collaboration, and we heard from other states as well what they were doing, and to really, talk about what they're doing and what we're doing and look for opportunities to scale. It was a great, great workshop, and I was just really proud to be a part of it.
Thank you, Governor. I think we have a little bit of time for either questions or comments from other govs. Governor Herbert.
Thank you. I appreciate the initiative, and I appreciate our guests here and their comments. I expect that most all of us are concerned about job creation, healthy economy, and what we can do to provide opportunities for everybody. There is a category that I'd like to hear comment on, your thoughts, that most all of us in the states face some form or fashion, and that's what we would call intergenerational poverty. It's not just somebody getting laid off. This is generation after generation that seems to not be able to find a niche in the marketplace. So what are your suggestions on how we can deal with intergenerational poverty and eliminate it?
This is what I talked about our foundation, the $100 million foundation. We're actually going after that problem specifically. And what Governor Reynolds talked about is that's an extraordinary, the high school program is extraordinary. And it gives kids purpose. You look at New York City. New York City has almost this tragedy of it produces almost 50,000 high school students per year. The city actually needs about 50,000 workers. and the match, the overlap, the Venn diagram is like 3%. It's a mess. So your program can solve things like that incredibly well. But if you look at the intergenerational issue, this is a nasty one because these folks tend to be forgotten. The educational system is not currently set for them. So we collectively need to fill that void. I think this is where community colleges can start to play an entirely new role to help with those workers. I think that this is where the private sector can come in and say, these are the skills that we're really looking for. Because I talked about those industrial revolutions. When you went from the second to the third, it was farm to factory. Farm to factory, the society was actually able to manage that reasonably well over time, but it had time. And those were still manual jobs basically. But how do you make this shift in a very compressed time frame to completely new skills and capabilities? And I think this is where we need to have that partnership, really leverage the infrastructure that exists like in community colleges and work together to build that curriculum. So I think that's a very important issue.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think that you have the power as governors to actually instruct your state agencies to make this a priority irrespective of the mission of that agency. In other words, addressing these issues of intergenerational equity is very important. Here I think Malcolm is right though, the public-private partnership is going to be very important. So Lumina Foundation does something fairly unusual for a private foundation, which is that we actually make direct equity investments in startup companies. It's complicated legally for private foundations to do this, but we've done this now in over a dozen companies. And this is a big theme of what we're trying to do, to actually invest in startups that can actually develop products that can bring this to scale. One of them, for example, is a company based in Boston called Care Academy. Care Academy is training home healthcare aides, trying to get the home healthcare aides actually into a credentialing pathway. They're providing services to our oldest and most infirm populations, but at the same time, we want to create opportunities for the people who are providing that service, who tend to be low income, first generation, minority populations, into a pathway so that they can grow and learn and develop their skill level so that there can be a cycle of intergenerational success that gets us out of this intergenerational cycle of poverty that I think has stymied so many states.
One quick one from Governor Mills, and I think that's our last question because we have to wrap up. So.
Thanks. Sort of a related question. Older populations. We have one of the oldest populations of workforce people in the state, in the country, in our state. And you talk about here mid-career workers achieving success. I'd like to hear a little more about those people, for instance, the thousands in Maine and other states who've lost their jobs in the pulp and paper mills and that kind of thing. And they don't have the same mindset that you're talking about when you talk about losing the tie and that kind of thing. And they don't have the same natural affinity for the digital environment. How do you break through that and retrain people who are more than mid-career, older generation workers?
Yeah, and this is where you can fill that void to show them what is possible and to show the path. Because right now, look, you know better than I, the political fallout where there's this view that there's a party going on in the Bay Area and in Seattle and New York and Boston and nobody else was invited. And that is occurring here, it's occurring all over Europe, and this is a big part of it. And so it's for government to step in and actually show the pathway, provide the bridge. And this is where we're talking about of the partnership, but go industry by industry, sector by sector to really provide that. Because we find that those are some of the absolutely the best workers. Quite often, there are issues with 20-year-olds or 20-somethings that you got to work out of them. But you find people in their 50s and 60s, they are so eager to work, they provide such leadership, but we need to provide that bridge through really practical programs.
Yeah, this is a really big problem because the truth is, you're not going to get that former Bath Iron Works worker to go do coding. It's not going to work. He or she is simply not going to want to do that. You've got to meet them where they are. You've got to actually bring the learning to the workplace. That person is not going to show up on a college campus. We have evidence of that they simply resist that idea, even if you present them with the data to show them what the economic model is. So we've got to bring the learning to the worker and actually give them some adjacent opportunities to grow their skills that over time that will get them to the high-paying jobs that will help them be successful. I think that's critical.
Well, thank you, Malcolm and Jamie. My chair's initiative technically does come to an end with this meeting. The conversations around good jobs for all Americans I think really it's just begun, and honored to work with all of you as we move this to the next level. To that effect, delighted to release what is the Governor's Action Guide to Achieving Good Jobs for All Americans. Each of you should have a copy of that guide, as well as the executive summary in front of you. We've captured many of those lessons that we learned from this initiative. And my hope is that you can also review some of the state examples included to get ideas for really results-oriented actions you can take in your own states to connect everyone to greater opportunities that will have a long-term impact. The guide follows that same three focus areas as the initiative did. That first section, workforce of the future, aligning education and work. We're talking about how technological innovations result in both new jobs and changes to existing jobs. We outlined the role for governors in identifying what skills workers will need to succeed in response to those changes, how to communicate those skills, and how to develop multiple pathways workers can take to gain those skills. You'll see examples such as the industry sector partnership I assembled in Montana that created kind of that ongoing forum for businesses and public partners to come together, solve workforce issues. You'll see how Arizona Governor Ducey set a goal of what percentage of Arizona residents he'd like to see gain post-secondary credentials by 2030 after consulting with business partners on their business needs. If that goal is met, Governor Ducey anticipates an additional $3.4 billion in new revenue to the state. And I know that so many of you as governors are setting what those attainment goals should look like and what a difference it can make. In the section on second acts, reskilling mid-career workers for success, we talked about the need for governors to focus on upskilling that current workforce, reskilling and reintegrated workers who've left behind or left out. As you noted, Jamie, it is a different world now as we view the skills. And in response to that challenge, in the guide, we show how governors can expand access to continuous learning opportunities for workers, really promote seamless job transitions, provide for holistic support. It's an example like how Governor Wolf issued an executive order to conduct a review of state professional and occupational licensure board requirements and processes, benchmark them against other states to improve seamless job transitions. I know that so many of us are working on that as well. We also look at how states can provide workers with access to childcare, paid family and medical leave, peer coaching to help them take advantage of career growth opportunities and juggle the family and work responsibilities. Then in that last section, which was sort of the third prong of the initiative, rural resurgence, empowering the rural workforce, we look at how rural economies have been affected by the Great Recession and are having a more challenging time rebounding. And it really hit throughout this initiative because rural isn't just a place like Montana. The rural's in New York, it's in every place across our various states. We look at the ways that governors can work with rural communities and individuals to actually leverage those unique strengths, provide employers with a source of underutilized talent. To do so, governors can build digital infrastructure, partnerships with anchor institutions, integrate rural economic and workforce development, create networks that are supporting those communities and individuals in rural areas. In that report, we showed how, as an example, Governor Reynolds in Iowa launched the Governor's Empowered Rural Iowa initiative that resulted in both significant investment in rural broadband, but also the growth of private sector investment in rural areas. And in that section, we look at how governors can address multiple challenges, such as transportation, childcare, health barriers, in order to provide support to rural residents. So there are other examples from your states presented in the guide. I encourage you to take a close look at it. And when I started this initiative a year ago, what I hoped at least is it could start a conversation, lead to action beyond the initiative. So I hope that the guide that NGA and all of us have worked on preparing really is a starting point for further conversations in your states and with your workforce agencies and with your educators. But we've got to make sure it's just the beginning, not the end. NGA is going to continue the conversation, the future of work, the Future Work Now Policy Forum in October, where governors will be invited to send policy teams to work on actions recommended in this guide. But let's all of us make this as just the starting off platform. And I really do appreciate so many of you joining and sending your teams along in this initiative. And thanks for your support. Let's continue to make sure that we're building momentum as we strive to create good jobs for all Americans. Thanks so much. Thank you to the speakers. We'll take a quick break and I think come back at 10:30.